Hey, we're back. Welcome to the Empowered Advocate. If you haven't listened in before, we're glad you're with us now. This podcast exists to empower you, the listener, to advocate for life at every stage. And we do that by covering a whole lot of different topics. And today is going to be no different. We're going to hear from a special guest. Her name is Lynn Hughes, and she is the author of the book Choose Zoe, a story of unplanned parenthood and the case for life. In this book, she shares her own story and the stories of others who have walked through unplanned pregnancies, abortion, miscarriage, abusive relationships, addictions, and more. So, Laura is a mother of 5 and grandmother of 8. She's a volunteer at her local Alpha Pregnancy Clinic and Alpha Mobile Unit, and she's the co founder of a Movement of Love ministry. And she serves as a speaker and teacher about pregnancy, fetal development, and post abortion trauma and recovery. All right, so now we're going to hear from Lynn Hughes. All right. Hey, Empowered Advocate listeners, we're so glad to have you back in our second episode of the new year. And I am so excited about this episode today because we have a special guest with us, Lynn Hughes, but she also goes by Laurie, right? Thanks so much for joining us today, Laurie.
Oh, I love it. It's exciting.
So, Lynn Hughes, she has written a book called Choose Zoe, a story of unplanned parenthood and the case for life. And she's got a really, really incredible story. But the cool thing about the book is that it shares not only your story, but also the stories of so many other women and how a lot of them are weaved together in just this really beautiful picture. So, before we jump into the story, can you share with us a little bit about the title? Because full disclosure, when I first saw this book, I thought, oh, this must be about a baby named Zoe. So share about the story behind the title.
Okay, sure. Well, you're not alone. Many women think that Zoe is the baby girl on the tattooed arm, but the baby girl is actually my daughter that is infertile and was told she would never conceive or carry. And we fasted and prayed for 10 years, and so the little baby girl on the arm is actually Hartley. That's one of my granddaughters, and we were just so excited. She came naturally, so God does miraculous things. And when I was looking into writing the book, there were 3 12-year-old girls within 1 month pregnant in my town here in Fairfield, California. And with the third little girl, I just went home, and burst into tears and asked God, how can I help? And so about 3:30 in the morning, it was this nudging, get up, write, educate my people. And so I started to write, and God was actually the one that revealed this to me. I didn't know what Zoe meant either. And Zoe means life in Greek in John 10:10. So I was thinking about all the things that Satan does to us, where he just tries to utterly destroy our lives. And in John 10:10, it says that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But then Jesus came, I have come to give life and to give life more abundantly. And so that word life is Zoe in Greek. You say it Zoe. It's really cool because that word there is what makes all the difference to me in our pregnancy situations and pregnancy loss situations too. And so that word Zoe talks about not just the physical life, but the divine, abundant, eternal life that we have with Christ. And it doesn't have to just happen in heaven, it can happen here on earth as well.
Oh, that's beautiful. And one thing that really stuck out to me as I was reading through your book is, and you mentioned it just now, about how God has made us for so much more than just existence. And we're created to thrive, not just survive. And so how would you say that applies to a person who is pro-life? I know you talk a lot about how being pro-life is more than just getting that birth, right? Just having children born. So what does it mean to have a Zoe life in the pro-life movement?
Well, it's kind of like, so Jesus came to give us life. And when he came, his life was full of suffering too. It wasn't just all, joyous.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a lot of suffering, and that he came to serve us and to heal us. And those are the things that we do in the pregnancy clinics. We offer all of that. And so out of that and out of our faith comes a fullness of joy. And when you look at any situation someone's in, if they're infertile, or if they're going through an adoption process, or if their daughter, is pregnant as a teenager, all the different things that can happen with couples and families and young girls. When you get to wrap your idea around the Zoe life and what that means and how we compassionately help others, it's a word. Zoe's a word that's like full of action. And it's the beauty of it, because Jesus does, right? Love does, like, it doesn't just like lie there. And so it's the hands and feet of Jesus and the things that we do where we help other people along the way.
I love that. So it's proactive. I like how you said it does. It's full of action. Well, let's talk about your story. So, I mean, your story has a lot of different moving parts to it, but let's kind of start at kind of where you begin in the book when you were 15. Share about what happened to you and about the reaction you received from your parents.
Yes, of course. So I started liking my boyfriend when we were 12. We met when we were 12 years old, and you're just kids, and there's just this fun attraction. You're having fun and everything. And at about 15, some of the kids that we hung out with were a little bit older, and they were having sex. And anyway, it was very sudden that I got pregnant. I was probably pregnant on the first time, and I hid the pregnancy. I went to a Catholic school, and I was the youngest of 8 kids. I had 2 sisters and a sister-in-law, all pregnant at the same time, and they were being celebrated. And my dad was taking pictures of them outside of the window, and I was thinking, I'm in trouble. Like, I should be in that photo. At the same time, I had those fears, but I was also growing in deep love for my child. I could already feel her kicking, and I was about 5.5 months along when my brother-in-law guessed that I was pregnant because my body was changing. And so my sister told my mom, and my mom said to me one day, I'm going to tell Dad on the way home from the airport when I pick him up. And we'd had no discussion about sex or pregnancy or anything. And so I called my boyfriend because I got so scared, and my parents never laid a hand on me. I was raised in a wonderful Irish Catholic home where, they just welcomed children, and figured every baby's a blessing. We were Irish. And I was still scared, though. And so I called my boyfriend, and he came to pick me up, and we went and sat in his car outside of the church. And then I got my nerve up in the middle of the night because I could remember my dad saying, every baby is a blessing. And so I went home, and I was walking up the long walkway, and, grabbed the doorknob, and I did the sign of the cross. And I was like, please, God, like, let him be asleep. And I walked in, and I opened up that door, and I'll never forget, I just burst into tears. My dad was awake, and he was sitting in his favorite green velvet chair, and he had pop bottle glasses on, and he was reading the Bible. And he just got up and walked right over to me, and he put his arms around me, and I'll never forget the love in his eyes. And he said, Mom told me that you're going to have a baby, and we're too old to raise another child. And all I ask is that you will pray every day what's best for your baby, whether you parent her with our guidance or whether you place her in loving adoptive arms. And he kissed me, and he said, now get to sleep. You have school in a couple hours. And that's like total grace. It gives me that picture of the prodigal son, right? Where the son comes home and the parent goes to them and wraps their arms around you. And that's what our God the Father does. I just happen to have parents that modeled that same thing. And that's really what we model at the pregnancy clinics. If someone doesn't have a good mom or something, like, we're that for them. And
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, that's so how did you feel in that moment when your dad reacted in that way? I mean, my goodness, what an act of love. Like how did you respond?
I didn't say a word. I just kind of melted in my heart, and I was very relaxed and very much at peace. And I just went in and went to bed to get up for school. So my fear was gone in that instant, just with his love and his encouragement, and that he didn't shame me.
Yeah, that's huge. That word shame is huge. I think, I know you've seen it in your work at the pregnancy center, and we see it here too. That so many women feel that shame imposed on them, whether from parents maybe, or friends, or a boyfriend, or whoever. But man, what a gift that you had to have them react in that way. I love that. Very impactful. So a lot of the book is sharing stories from other women that you've encountered during your time at the pregnancy center. How did you get connected to the pregnancy center? What started you off on that path?
Well, my mother was a volunteer back in the 70s, right after Roe v. Wade in Montana. And so I grew up with parents that were very pro-life. They were very active and they were very against abortion, but they did it in a choosing life type of way, So we knew that that was not something that we would choose. It was not didn't line up with the Word of God, and so I was raised in that type of a family. And then I went on to have, my other children. But one day, one of my daughters, she had gone on a missions trip. And when she came home, she said she felt like God had impressed upon her heart to start volunteering at Alpha. And she had just turned 16. And so you have to be 16 to begin to volunteer. And so our church had had Alpha come out the same Sunday that she was gone. And so I had gotten 2 of each piece of their literature. And so we joined together.
Oh, that's so neat.
Yeah, that was really neat too. And so, yeah, she's very active in the pro-life community too. So we joined together.
Oh, what a blessing. Well, can you maybe share one of the stories that you talk about in your book of one of the women that you met and built a relationship with while you were at the pregnancy center?
Sure. One that just always grabs my heart. She was herself abandoned in the hospital at 2 days old. The mother was on drugs and she left her in the hospital. So she started out with a life of abandonment and rejection herself. Fast forward, in high school, she was sex trafficked. And we're talking about a girl that's just coming in pretty broken. And so she was just walking by, going to the library and saw us. We have in Fairfield, we have a really pretty, just kind of a little Victorian home, very inviting. She saw a free pregnancy test and she came in. And so she was indeed pregnant. And we began to just build a relationship. And she was a little tough cookie. It took some time. Like each week, she would trust me a little more with her story. Right. And she would trust me a little more with her story. And she was being abused. She was not treated well at all. She'd not been told great things about herself, but she did have some faith. And so during this process, we also got to infuse the situation with faith and just cover her with the gospel and just showing her how much that God loves her and the baby growing within her womb. She was able to get out of her tough situation, which is really amazing. And she had not been mothered or mentored. And so we looked at fetal development, and she watched all of the different Earn While You Learn courses where you can learn to safely bathe a baby, how you would hold a baby, how you would nurse the baby, what was going to happen during the pregnancy as well as during the birth. I mean, she just was like a sponge. She wanted to learn everything. And it was really, really neat to see that relationship. It was very hard for her to trust me. And even now she'll say, do you have this relationship with the others? And, just kind of always reiterating how special things are between us. And so she went on to give birth to a little boy, and she's just done a fabulous job with him. All of the love that she lacked in her life and in her upbringing, she chose to just give it out to her son. And so she would, be solid in her church and get her son where he had mentors around him, male mentors. And that little boy, like he right away, you could tell he's an evangelist, right? So he was always talking about, he'd be just a little tiny boy, like 2.5 years old, and he'd walk into my house and he would like grab the crucifix off the wall and he would say, do you know who this is? This is Jesus. Like, he died for my sins. He died for your sins. And, you know, I'm just like, oh my goodness. And so to see someone that lacked that love, you would think that she might not be a good parent or she might not make good decisions, but it was the opposite. God gave her wisdom. He gave her an ability to want to learn and to want to do right by her son. And it's just been beautiful to see her growth. And, I'm still in contact with her, and to see her, flourishing. Things are still tough. She does not have a husband, and finances are not always easy. And no one said that teen pregnancy was going to be easy, but it is always worth it. She'll be the first one to tell you, like, this is the love of her life, and she's very, very happy for the decision that she made, and all the support that she received.
That's great. And one thing I heard you say several times, or you use the words mentors and relationship, and it's just neat to see how the relationship you had with your parents, the grace they showed you, and eventually you being able to turn around and show that grace to other women in relationships and in mentoring. I mean, that's a huge reason why so many women feel like they can't carry to term and parent, because of that lack of relationship. So it's just neat to see that come full circle.
Yeah.
Now, for you, you shared a few stories about your daughters, and some things that happened that were really heartbreaking. And you share a little bit about how you responded to that and how God brought healing. Could you share a little bit about those stories?
Oh, absolutely. Well, many times with pregnancy, there's some kind of abuse. And so there'll be times when some stories of rape will be intertwined, whether the girl gets pregnant or not. And one of my daughters at 14, she was date raped. And so she will talk about what she went through. And this is the one that volunteered with me at 16 at the pregnancy clinic. And she would share with me how that felt, and how it felt because she was missing her period, and how it felt to think about being pregnant by the rapist. And she came up with a very courageous decision that if she was pregnant, that she would carry the child. And then it turned out where she did start her period and was not pregnant. And she goes into the schools too as part of the prevention team. And we teach teenage dating violence and that whole cycle of abuse that starts in dating, like domestic violence.
Right.
Yeah, so it's been very powerful. She spoke at abstinence conferences. She spoke all over at churches and schools, even public schools, on dating violence. And she's helped many, many people come forward and be a mandated reporter, getting them the help they needed, because I sent her to a sexual trauma counselor 7 months. Every Wednesday she would go. And on the last day, she had spoke to 100 girls at a conference. And when she went in to tell her counselor said, "You're done.
Wow.
If you can do this, you don't need to,
Right.
come back." And so that's, one of the powerful stories. And then another one that was totally, heartbreaking, and really changed the course of the book also, because I wanted this to be a book about choosing life. Of course, we want to see women healed from abortion, but many times someone won't even crack a book open if they just think you're just being judgmental, and you're just saying everything against choice. Mm-hmm. And really, we're not. We're there for women no matter what decisions that they make, and ultimately the choice is theirs. And so I'm writing this book because I've got these teenage girls, 12 years old, pregnant, and my heart's broken, and I'm asking God for ideas. What are ideas? How can I help parents? How can I, help prevent this? And what can I do about it when it does happen? And looking at laws and all kinds of things. And I get news from my daughter, the one that I was pregnant with at 15, that she had had a secret teen abortion. So exactly what I was trying to, fight against.
Right.
All of a sudden, like, I felt like Satan had used that as a weapon against me, like to hear all those things like, well, you can't write this pro-life book now, and your story's changed, and plus, like, I love my kids and grandkids so much, and you hear that abortion hurts family members, but to feel it personally, I was in a fetal position, like I was traumatized, and she had already been through post-abortive healing, and so she was real gentle with me, and let me know what had happened and everything. And then she said, Mom, use me, use my story. Wow. And that was really difficult. I had a very hard time putting that chapter together. And much of what I heard when I was beginning to write that chapter was for the first time. Mm. And so that's a very tough one. But there's beauty and redemption in that too, because, now we began a post-abortive ministry at our church to not put it all on the pregnancy clinics, but to bring it into the church. And that's one of my desires, is to teach pastors and priests and leaders how to help the women and the men who have been hurt by abortion to be healed in the church, because the church is a place of healing. And so my daughter leads classes like I do. And, it's really exciting. And now she's actually on staff too. And so she was a director in Napa before our Napa office closed. And now she's on staff, here in Vacaville in Northern California. And she's just so smart. And she was a school psych for 13 years. And so she's educated, very articulate, absolutely beautiful. And she's my little girl. But to see her in that aspect, and, pregnancy clinic workers are mostly volunteers. And if they do get paid, it's not a lot. And so to see her change a course in life, to be able to help people, in the same position that I was and that she was, is a real blessing to me. And so it's really cool to be able to serve alongside of, my daughters. And to me, that just feels like redemption.
That's the word I was about to say, redemption. What a neat story of how, that's what God does. He takes our brokenness and he heals it. And then not only does he heal it, but he uses it to minister to others. So that's really neat to hear. One thing you wrote in your book that I wrote down from this chapter where you're talking about your daughter, finding out about your daughter's abortion. But I just want to read this quote and then talk about it. You said, in an effort to avoid the dysfunction and pain of the teen parent life, she, your daughter, introduced deep pain and dysfunction into other areas of her life. And then you went on to talk about how, essentially there's this idea that abortion will eliminate the problem or the pain of the situation, when in reality, it introduces new pain in maybe unexpected ways. Talk about that a little bit, because I think it's so important to be honest with women about the fact that when you're pregnant, your life changes forever, no matter what you choose. So how, so your daughter was able to, like you said, avoid the dysfunction of teen pregnancy, but how did that introduce other types of dysfunction or pain into her life, and other women who have chosen abortion too?
Well, and she, like many, she looked at me and said, I don't want to be a teen mom and struggle like my mom did. And, it's kind of like a rash decision, like every decision when you're, so young. And so with her, it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to get the best education. I'm going to get a scholarship. I'm, going to be successful. And she did. And so sometimes you go on that path of perfectionism, and you still hit walls. You hit walls with, when you get married, there's something lacking there that's not talked about yet, not healed. And then you go on to have other children, and it's harder for you to possibly connect to your children, or you will helicopter mom. Mm. And, many women will mask things with, sex or alcohol, depression. More women struggle with depression, and there's definitely a higher suicide rate too for the teen girl within 6 months after her abortion. She's 6 times more likely to commit suicide. Wow. And so my daughter did struggle some also with, self-worth and perfectionism, and some depression. So when you are in a process of recovery, then you begin to look at all of the things that happened, even the childhood, being raised with a young single mom. And that meant that she wasn't going to have her dad involved in her life. And she was adopted, a few years later, when I got married and had more children. And it's kind of like, for her, some of it was subtle, not knowing the different things that you're going through. And then through recovery, through Celebrate Recovery, and through post abortive recovering at the pregnancy center. And then we have post abortive ministry at the church called a Movement of Love. And through all of those things, and further healing and further recovery, she was able to, drill that down and see the different root causes, so to speak. And it's just amazing, what the post-abortive syndrome, it'll be like PTSD for some. Some never get over it, and there's so much anxiety that seems that gets infused from that one act, and just repeat traumas and things. So I love that it says in the Bible that Jesus came to heal us, and that is not one time. That's a life of healing. And so as things come up in our life, then Jesus can just continually be able to heal us and help us to be strong and empower other people. So I'm really proud of my daughter. She's definitely self-reflected, and she's so smart in that area. So she's providing a lot of freedom for other people because she's been in recovery for so long, because she helps lead Celebrate Recovery too.
Yeah, that's great. And for those of you listening, Laurie puts in her book a ton of resources and studies and citations that talk about the impact of abortion on a person. I know you mentioned just now things like suicide rates and depression, but then also talks extensively about the healing that comes from that. So super. I love that as much of an impact as abortion has on us, Christ is greater than abortion. He's greater than grace that is greater than all our sin. That's who he is for us. So, and that comes across so strongly in the book. One chapter in particular in your book focuses on pregnancy loss and infertility. And you share a personal story that was really heartbreaking for me as I was reading it. Talk about that experience and how you were able to find healing moving forward after that.
Well, many people will say that having a child young, or, um, you'll learn your lesson basically. And I did not learn my lesson, and I was pregnant again. And most young girls who are pregnant as teenagers, like 50% of them are pregnant again within a year. And that was me. Um, and so the same poor relationship, of course, I was in love, I was young, but it was pretty dysfunctional, and nobody's fault. It's just the two of us were way too young to have a relationship with sex and a child. And we were trying to do our best, but we were broken young teenage kids too, and just trying to have fun and go to prom and things like that. And so I became pregnant again, and it was, again, I hid the pregnancy. And my boyfriend and I weren't doing very good because I stayed home with my parents, and I would take care of my daughter, and he could still run track and play football. And he was, a little while later, was actually prom king. And I had to leave my school, kids that I've gone to school with since first grade. I had a lot of shame at the school, and in my church, and my life dramatically changed. And I feel like I was probably depressed when I think about it, because I lost a lot of weight and gotten real skinny. And I got pregnant again, and he was with another girl at the park rolling around in the grass, and I became infuriated. And I just was like, I remember, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, that's all I could think to say. And he was rolling around, with some new girl. I called her Miss Chicago. And I was just so mad. And he's like, I'm not with you. Like, so I'm like, what are you doing with her? He's like, I'm not with you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, we were just together last night and he drove me to school today. You know, I was looking for him to give me a ride home and go pick our daughter up at daycare. And I was just totally in shock. And all of a sudden I just was infuriated. I just got totally angry. And I went after him like no tomorrow. And I was fighting him down 2 city blocks. We fought all through the park. And, you know, it was just a lot of tussling and tension. And, you know, I managed to get home and I held my daughter. And I remember she was so tiny and those little fat hands. And she was like patting me on the cheek, you know, um, and I remember thinking, okay, you know, uh, this is just another thing that I have to go through. And when I went to bed that night, I woke up in horrific pain, and I'd been through labor before, so I knew that I was laboring, and I managed to get into the bathroom, and I miscarried a little boy, and I was 22 weeks pregnant. I was already feeling him, you know, kicking and excited to have a little sibling for my daughter and finding names for whether it was a boy or a girl. Back in those days, you didn't know. There was not ultrasounds or reveals. And, you know, I was already planning a life and hoping I would get married and the things that we dream of when we're young. And I lost a little boy that night and I was crying out to my mom, but I didn't want to wake my dad. I didn't want to wake my baby girl in the crib. And my daughter made one little squawk for her bottle and my mom woke up. And so she gave her a bottle and she came into the bathroom and she's like, Lori, what's wrong? And she's like, oh my God, are you pregnant again? And I just said, not anymore. And I was just like crying into the curtain. And, you know, it was just terrible. Like he was perfectly formed little miniature of his, you know, little sister. And he had like little tiny hands and little tiny feet. And I remember thinking like, you know, he'll never walk. He'll never, you know, play with a ball. And all these things were going through my head. And my mom just said, I'll take him and put a pad on and go back to bed. And so I touched the handle on my door and I looked up and I saw this little plaque, you know, like you're a mom, those little plaques you get for your kids. And it said Lori's room and it had a little pink princess on it. And I remember thinking, I'm no princess. And I went in and I laid in the bed and I pulled those yellow flowered sheets up over my head and I went into postpartum depression and I was introduced to that day. So I know very well what it feels like to lose a child. And then when you're so young, I didn't talk about it for 25 years. And so you hold on to that and it kind of makes you helicopter your babies. Mm-hmm. You know, you're always making sure that you're safe. With my son, after I lost my little boy at 22 weeks, the next time that I was pregnant, I was about to lose that little boy and found out I had incompetent cervix. And so I did the stitches. I had 2 different surgeries and I stayed bedridden and, you know, and I watched a lot of Little House on the Prairie and but I did anything I could to carry my babies. You know, I would listen to the doctors or not. Sometimes I didn't, but I would just protect them like no tomorrow. And I think when you've gone through some real struggles of hardship, of infertility or miscarriage or had a stillborn, you know, or a young child, you know, die of SIDS, like it just affects you so much as a mom, how you're going to parent. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize either until I started talking about miscarriage, how much it had affected me in the same ways that my daughter was affected, some of the same ways from her abortion. And we do have a miscarriage study also at the pregnancy clinic. And that's very, very helpful. You know, and then there's advice in the book too on what do you say or what do you not say, or, you know, how are you there for someone when they're going through something. And I intertwined it with infertility because there's so many people that are infertile. And that's been one of the great shocks of my book is how many men have come and talked to me about their lack in ability to be able to give their wife a child, mm-hmm. or that they had helped pay for an abortion or something. You know, men are a huge part of the conversation. It's obviously half of their genetics and half of their their child, full child, but they've
Right.
been so left out of the conversation. And to think that men have been able to find healing and be able to talk through what they're going through has been really a really beautiful part of the outcome. I spoke at Rotary just a couple months ago, and afterwards there was so many men that came up to me and told me their stories, and I was just like, man, I thought this book was gonna um, sink in more with women. And I really wanted males and men leaders and men pastors and dads to get involved in this conversation, and they have. And so that's really, really exciting. It was something I was prayerful about, but just thought it would relate more to women.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, at the end of the day, men or women, it's ingrained in us to want to care for our own, for our children. We fight that in a variety of ways, and I think our culture wants us to, push the narrative that it is just a women's issue. It's just for women, and it's just so not. But I thank you. I just really thank you for sharing all of your story, but especially just those pieces of your story that are just so painful. Again, I know we've mentioned the word redemption again and again, but just how God is able to take the painful parts of our lives, and when we're vocal about it after we've experienced healing, obviously, just from what you mentioned, it's encouraging other people to speak up about their own stories and to pursue healing. So it's just amazing to see how God does that. And I know that the day when you're reunited with your son is going to be a beautiful, beautiful day.
Yeah.
Um, so at the very end of your book, you are close to the end. You shared a story about your grandparents, and to kind of illustrate the Zoe life, the abundant life. And I just loved it. I just thought it was such a sweet way to wrap things up. Can you share that story and about how that moment that they had really encompasses this idea of living an abundant life?
Absolutely. And it does. And, they were there in the beginning of my life. It's my mother's parents, and they lived in a little town of Augusta, Montana. And when my mom miscarried after I was born, and then she got rheumatic fever and she was very ill, um, myself and my brother, the two youngest of the 8 kids, we went to live with our grandparents. And several of the grandkids went during the summers. And we had these salt of the earth type of grandparents. They were just amazing. And my grandma's even in the uh, Cowboy Hall of Fame, because back in the day they didn't have a Cowgirl Hall of Fame. It was just guys, but she made it into the Cowboy Hall of Fame.
That's awesome.
And she was just wonderful. She was a nurse, and my grandpa was a postmaster, and he went into mediation a lot, and he was known for being very kind and very loyal, and very safe, and making really wise decisions. And they were just fabulous people. And my grandma, as part of her nursing, also did some midwifery. And this particular time, we talked about this story a lot, and in our family. Like, we have a huge family, and we talk about this story a lot, but not in detail. But because I went and talked to my grandma more in detail, I was able to get some really great, story nuggets. And there was just a terrible storm, and this was when my grandparents had five step stair kids. So my mom's the youngest of 5 kids. And there was a terrible storm. And at the time, they were ranchers in Montana. And my grandpa had a wheat harvest, a wheat field that he was just getting ready to harvest. It was almost, that time. And here came this terrible storm, and it was a hailstorm. And like in Montana, sometimes it just destroys the cars, and you'll have, golf ball size hail. And so my grandma had gone a little bit before the storm to help someone bring birth to their child. And so she had gone to help a young pregnant woman that was in the storm, that was having a baby. Like a lot of babies are coming in storms, right? Storms of our life.
Right.
And so my grandpa's back at the farm, and some neighbors came, and they were, just trying to cover the hail and different things. And they just had the kids, get out of the barn, and they were trying to get the animals in the barn. And my grandpa's looking at this crop, which was going to be his whole year of abundance. as far as monetarily. And my grandma came home after helping the young lady give birth, and she's walking up to the farm and she sees that the wheat field is all flat and tattered, and she finds my grandpa, and my grandpa has some of the community members there, a few neighbors, and the my mom and the siblings, the little kids out, and he's gathered the pail and he's making ice cream. So he's churning this ice cream, and it gives you that idea of, like, how you make lemonade out of lemons, right?
Right, right.
In our house, it's kind of like, you make the ice cream, like whatever destroyed your crop, you turn it around and you use it for good. And it's a decision that you make when you have faith and you know that all of this abundance comes from God, whether it's monetarily or whether it's that you have a great husband and wife situation and relationship like they did, and they were in their community and they would help others. Farmers helped other people. They had 5 children that they loved and adored. And so abundance it encompasses all of that. And especially when you have faith in God and you have Christ, you can get through any of those storms in life and you can make the best out of those situations. And, there's always provision. It might be tough, and that was tough for them for quite a while to lose those type of finances, but life's not over. My grandparents were strong and they were able to work, and people in the community cared for them. And, it's kind of like how it says it takes a village, right? It takes a village um, to raise a child. Well, it also takes a village and a community of Christ and a good church to help us through hard times. And, just loving your neighbor, so simple, just to be able to love your neighbor. And my grandparents, they were those people that would help people understand the abundant life. You don't have to wait until you get to heaven to live with abundance and feel that sense of eternity. And when the bumps in the road come, and they're going to, when the storms of life come, they're going to, we're promised that. But we're also promised peace in the storm. You think about that boat, and it's full of storm, and Peter's out there, and here comes Jesus, and he puts peace into the situation. So there's always hope, there's always peace, there's always love, and there's always life wrapped up in that word Zoe. And it's the hope that we give to other people that help them to make decisions that they can live with and not be so full of regret, and even help them with things that they didn't decide, like infertility, or losing a child or something, or maybe a boyfriend or a mother going and coercing you to have your abortion as a young girl. There's all those situations that that God wants to infuse His hope and be able to have people live that abundant life. I mean, that's literally why Jesus came, was to give us the abundant life. That word Zoe.
I love that. And it reminds me of in the book of John when Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And that's that message of hope. Um, and I think that's just the perfect place to wrap up. Laurie, thank you so much for sharing your story. If you're listening, I'd really encourage you to grab a copy of Choose Zoe. We've only touched on a little bit today of what's in the book. And there's also one thing we didn't get to talk about, but Laurie does a really good job of kind of breaking down the logic behind or an argument, I guess, against abortion, and just breaking it down into a way that's easily understandable. So definitely pick you up a copy, and then we'll be providing you with some information about a giveaway as well, because we want to give you guys the chance to win a free copy of her book. Laurie, thank you so much. If someone wants to follow you or learn more about you and what you do, where can they go to find more information?
Well, I have a website. It's choosezoe.com. So it's CHOOSEZOE.com. I'm also pretty active on Facebook, and I look at my messenger. I have Instagram. You can message me there. I have a Twitter. Um, don't do a lot there, but you can you can find me.
Twitter. Twitter. Don't get me started on Twitter. Right. Well, we will list all of that information in the show notes so that if you're listening, you can find all of that easily. Laurie, thank you so much for your time with us. And listeners, we'll be back again with a new episode in a few weeks. Thanks so much. Please subscribe if you have not already. And we will see you next time on the Empowered Advocate podcast. Thanks.